Ready to move to the next level in your product career? I'm Shobit from Intentional Product Manager. Join me as we discuss ways to help you stand out in your job search and your career so you can have more impact and make more money.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Intentional Product Manager podcast. Today we're diving deep into the world of platform product management, which is more technically challenges and one of the most impactful areas in enterprise tech. And our guest is Indra Misra, who's the director of product for data, AI, and cloud platforms at Bill. He's got extensive experience leading platform and infrastructure teams at companies like Twitter, also known as X, and Tapjoy. And we'll talk about how AI is transforming enterprises, what it takes to build highly scalable platform products, and how engineers can transition into platform PM roles. So it's going to be super useful for you. Andra, welcome to the Intentional Product Manager podcast.
Thanks, Shobit. Happy to be here and looking forward to our discussion today.
So, for those people who are unfamiliar or sometimes just unclear, what exactly is platform product management and how does it vary from other types of product management roles?
Great question. And I get this question a lot from some of the aspiring PMs, but also some of the PMs who are more on the customer facing side of the house. So, how I see platform product management is um, it's the foundational capabilities which we consider as a platform product that enables internal stakeholders across the enterprise to quickly build and deliver their features at scale. So let me unpack this for you and your audience. I divide this into six kind of high level areas where a platform PM is kind of different than a traditional growth PM or a PM who's building products more on top of the stack. First is building foundational systems. So think of platform PMs focus on creating foundational future product developments like APIs, SDKs, data platforms, AI platforms, developer platforms. The goal of these products or platform products is to kind of create a structure horizontally for the teams that will help them release and build features quickly and at scale. So that's number one. Second is the customers mostly are internal teams within the company, but directly or indirectly, we do touch external products or external customers. So we are kind of enabling other teams to make sure that they are able to build and deploy products on our platform capabilities. Number three is focus on scalability and efficiency. For enterprise companies, Shobit, the biggest challenge which I've seen is there are a lot of one-off solutions. When the company is in a kind of a growth mode and when they are moving to a much more mature state. And this is where platform products play a pivotal role. So, in the previous world where you are kind of in the growing stage, you are building one-off products to enable your teams, which are not kind of scalable or reproducible for other teams to take benefit for. So when platform products are built, their main focus is on scalability and efficiency, and reduce this mindset of kind of building one-off enablement products for these different feature teams across the company. So scalability and efficiency and horizontal mindset is the third kind of critical part of platform product management. Fourth is cross-functional collaboration. A lot of vertical teams, if you see in companies who are building features, like there can be a notification team at X, which is just responsible for in-app notifications, email notifications, etc. But if you compare it with platform teams, we are building a messaging. I'll give you an example in similar context. So a messaging platform or a data platform or an AI platform that is helping not even just the notification team, but maybe ads team, which is or the personalization team at X, right? So these are some of the kind of platform capabilities which are required by all feature teams across. So when we are building these kind of capabilities, cross-functional collaboration is very critical because you need to understand the use case across the company of these feature stores. So you need to talk to their PMs more and more, so that what you're building is one solution for all, not these one-off solutions. And it doesn't have to be over-engineer this platform capability to serve all the needs across the company, but you can piecemeal it iteratively. So that mindset of iterative development that would evolve into a kind of one platform solution for all use cases across the company is very critical for a platform PM. That brings me to the fifth kind of critical aspect of platform PMs is strategic and horizontal thinking. Uh, you should be able to connect your high level business objectives with the needs of the individual teams. And these platform solutions are kind of a way to enable those vertical solutions. So that long term and horizontal thinking is very, very critical. So these are the 4 5 kind of areas which I feel is very critical for a platform PM, and it helps differentiate and connect the vertical PM space, which is the PM growth, or for PMs who are more on top of stack.
Let's continue to dig in because this is great information and I want to like make it concrete for everybody who's listening. So first, just give me an example of a platform PM role that you worked in and a little bit of what you did there, so it all brings it together.
So I'll talk about my current company where at Bill, which for your audience who don't know, it's a financial services company which helps small and medium businesses with their accounts payable solutions, account receivable solutions, spend and expense management, and cash flow operations. And we also have a bunch of lending products like invoice financing and other things. So think of us as a one-stop shop for all the small and medium businesses finance team. So we help them pay their vendors. If they're short of cash flow, we provide them financing to their bills. We help them manage the spend and expense of their employees through a credit card offering. And managers and leaders can manage the budget for the employees, etc. We are a SaaS platform, both web application and also a mobile application, and we have a bunch of products in our portfolio. So the use cases which we have varies across the board because the verticals which you see, the biggest verticals which the platform teams at Bill support, one is the payments team, the second is the growth and the web platform team, and the third is kind of the working capital team, which is the kind of invoice financing and those lending products. So within these verticals, we sit horizontally, and we are trying to enable all these teams with their needs for data, AI platform, and developer enablement. So I'll give you two examples, one on the data side, one on or maybe three, one on data side, one on AI, and one on developer enablement. So starting off with data, we have a knowledge graph product, which is a graph database which helps our risk teams to kind of identify and detect the potential fraud actors who are trying to come and use Bill's system to move money and commit fraud. So to give you an example, these actors can steal a bunch of bank accounts from dark web or wherever, and try to create a fake business on a platform, and through that move money to a vendor, and that vendor can be their personal bank account, right? So if and whatever money we are losing through these fraud actors, which is immense, we are liable to pay for it, right? Because the businesses it's fraud, and we need to do it for audit purposes. So this graph product is helping our risk teams to kind of give deeper insights on how these fraud actors are operating. So we have these list of identified fraudsters, which we know already, or which we've caught them during action, and we've flagged them so that no money is transferred through them, right? And now these fraud actors are kind of creating these new businesses and new organizations on our system constantly, and they are the same people who've done this in the past. So this graph database is finding connections and deeper insights between their historic way of how they've gamed our system. So these deeper insights is impossible to find through naked eye or through traditional databases. So we find different degrees of connections using their devices, what IP addresses they are using, where the money is going, and whatnot. So it's a very sophisticated system. So this product is not only helping risk team, right? It's solving fraud is one of the use case. The other use case which we are helping out is we have a lot of vendors in our system whom the businesses pay, and there are a lot of duplicate vendors in our system because our businesses don't have confidence. They'll create a new vendor because this is money is important. So if they're not sure about a vendor in the drop down list, they'll create another one. So this entity resolution of matching these vendors who are the same, we use this graph product to find the relationship and mapping with them and try to deduplicate them. So this is another use case. So this graph database is not only helping fraud, network entity resolution, but also improving our search, intelligent search, clustering for our marketing team, go-to-market teams for sales and targeted kind of marketing. So clustering similar kind of businesses. So these are some of the multiple use cases which this data product, aka knowledge graph, is serving across the company.
That's super helpful. And so, like, in some sense, while you are serving the end user, your intermediate customer is these teams that ultimately truly understand the like customer's use case and you work with them. So
Exactly. So indirectly, we are touching the external customers, but through these feature teams who are kind of slightly on top of the stack.
So tell us more. You worked on, you mentioned AI, data platform, cloud infrastructure. Give us some more examples of how these drive value for different types of enterprises.
Sure. So this knowledge graph product, which I told you, we are saving multiple millions of dollars for the company. So this is one value, right? Because this deeper insights is not available for our internal risk teams, which we are providing. Because of that, we are potentially avoiding these fraud. So as part of fraud savings, Bill is saving a lot of money. Now moving on, let me give you another example of a developer enablement product which we are building and how it's getting value for Bill as a business and as a company. So we've built this one-stop shop kind of a conversational AI bot for developers, which will help with them, which will help all our engineers, which are 600 plus engineers at Bill, to kind of ask any questions about in their developer software development lifecycle, starting off with writing code, testing it lower environment, moving it to upper environments and prod, deploying it, and also asking questions about where is this automation exist, how do I automate this part, or which is the right team to help me solve this problem, and how do I create a ticket on them. So it can be a cognitive task or a non-cognitive task. So to give you some examples, a developer can come in and say, hey, I'm stuck with this I need to create infrastructure as a code for deploying XYZ microservice, which I need to move it to prod. It goes to this bot, types this question. The bot asks them a couple of back and forth questions. If there is some documentation available, the bot will tell them. If there's not, if there's an automation available, it will start asking questions about the input of that automation which is required. And once it gathers the input from the developer, it will run that automation. And if not, then maybe there's a shared services team like a DB team or an infrastructure team, which would need to help them. So it will directly create a Jira ticket on their board, and they don't have to worry about to finding which is the right team, how to create ticket and all that. So it will take care of everything, and all this within their place of choice. It can be in ID or within Slack where developers spend most of their time. Now, how it brings value to the company? So we are enabling reducing this developer time and turnaround time for help them ship features, right? So all the time which they save, it's helping accelerate the velocity for our company to ship features faster. And whatever that feature would be, that particular developer is trying to ship, there is some kind of top line business metric associated with it. So how we as platform PMs, how we track this kind of impact or business number is translating that developer are saved to this business metric.
You are like tying ultimately to what the ultimate value is for the company. Like you're constantly thinking about that. So I think with that, why don't we jump into like what are some of the biggest challenges that you face as a platform PM in maybe like aligning with different teams you're working with, and how do you navigate all those challenges?
Great question, Shobit. And I think there it depends on company to company, but I will share. I have enough understanding of smaller size to larger size companies, and I'll summarize those challenges into 3, 4 buckets. The first biggest challenge is strategic versus tactical mindset. So, based on the maturity of the company and the leadership you're working with, you need to navigate through these optics where the company is probably in the middle of this zone between strategic or operation tactical, or they are on one side or they are on the extreme other side. To give you one example, as an infrastructure team, I can either make platform products that is serving multiple use cases, or I can build these one-off solutions where I'm acting in a call center mode, and as soon as a feature team comes up with a request, we just go build things on whatever we can do for them. Right? So this is a tactical and operational call center mode. So the problem with this approach is when the company starts to grow and scale up, this is not sustainable at all, because this is a never ending loop where you are constantly creating tech debt, not just for the company, not just for the infrastructure or shared services or platform teams, but also for the company and feature teams, because they don't have an idea of, okay, which is the right tool to solve a problem, because there are hundreds of tools doing the same thing with slightly different nuances. So this strategic and tactical mindset is very critical. You need to have a slow transition in wherever that company is in their journey or in the band of spectrum here, to make that shift. And that shift and that change management should come in from the platform PM organization, who are kind of in the driving seat. So this is the challenge which I face a lot, because these feature teams have their deadlines to meet, and they want us to be in the operational mode. So unless you have that drive and your story right, where you can convey that in short term there might be some challenges for the feature teams, but this is ultimately great for the company and for them as well to be self-sufficient in the near future. That's number one. Second key is communication. How you tell the story is very critical. If you start pushing these platform products and operate in a black box and tell feature teams, hey, we platform teams are not available for this quarter because we are heads down building this product and capability that's scalable. That doesn't work, because these features teams will in turn start building their one-off solutions, same problem, and creating more tech debt because they need to ship things. So working with them to understand how to keep unblocking them and unlocking value for their team while building these platform capabilities as POCs, iterative solutions, MVPs, and kind of handshaking with them and negotiating with them that, okay, we'll deliver some value for you, but it will come up with this cost and this timeline. You might have to negotiate with this, and there's a change management aspect associated. So the communication part and iterative mindset is very, very critical. Lastly, I think this is kind of tied to communication part, is as platform PMs, and when you're building platform products, it's very hard to translate your metrics or OKRs to top line business metrics. I gave you some example on developer productivity a few minutes ago, but you need to build your story around those OKRs and have it kind of somewhat measurable. It's impossible to measure everything, but you need to have a story and connect some quantifiable approach where you are seeing that this platform product will contribute to XYZ part of this top line business metric. Once you have these three things under control, those challenges you can overcome.
I'm going to switch topics and talk a bit about something that's really top of mind for a lot of people. AI is obviously top of mind, and there's a lot of AI in enterprise tech. So let's talk about some of the things. So you mentioned you've led AI and data initiatives at multiple companies. Give us some ideas and some examples of the ways AI is transforming enterprise operations right now?
My answer, what I give to you right now, might change in like next 15 days. But this space, as you know, is evolving like rocket speed. So, but I think the use cases, this whole evolution has kind of matured enough to at least narrow down some of the top use cases for at least enterprises on how they would leverage this technology. So let me bucket them into two high-level use cases. The first one is the efficiency play, which is the internal use case. AI systems nowadays are they've completely disrupted how features are shipped, how code is written, how code is deployed, how developers used to document their features, how PMs used to prototype, how designers used to function. Every part of the stack on how software development used to be done 3 years ago has been disrupted. Now, the scale at which that part of the stack is disrupted is kind of different for different scenarios. The internal efficiency or the internal use case is where enterprise companies are trying to leverage how they operate and how they can efficiently manage their delivery or value to their customers. So there are two kind of forks to it, or kind of two sub arms to it. The first one is the speed, and second one is cost, right? How quickly you are building features and unlocking value to the customers, that speed will in turn improve the business metrics or top of line business metrics for your company, right? And how cheaply you are doing it or how cost efficiently you are doing it will obviously improve your OPEX. So the internal use cases are across this efficiency play, both on cost side and speed side. And obviously, there's an underlying kind of horizontal layer, quality. So if you see this efficiency pillar for internal use cases for AI, there's one vertical for speed, another vertical for cost, and the horizontal vertical for quality. So let me give you one examples of like internal use cases happening across these three building blocks. For speed, traditionally, if you see the traditional ML development, um, the data scientists or the ML engineers had to do a lot of, and also the data engineers had to do a lot of computation of these raw data points of features which are coming in from different data producers across the system. Those data producers can be internal APIs, external APIs, coming in from instrumentation from external product, or it can come in from third-party data sources via streaming or through the feedback loop which they are creating from customers, right? So these different aggregated data producers were kind of putting all this in one data lake. And this data lake used to be acting as a source of truth, which in this today world will also be the same. But how these features or raw events or data points are computed and transformed has tremendously changed. The turnaround of these kind of complex computation has changed from like hourly, if you consider like latency wise, to like near real time, but also how much time it took to build and compute these features. So earlier it required two teams to build these complex mathematical logic and computations around it. Now there are systems which are like already vendors doing this and disrupting this space, where they are automated pipelines who you just integrate with your tech stack of these data lake and different data sources, and they can compute these features on the fly for you, and you can use it for traditional AI or for Gen AI agentic use cases. So the speed of building these kind of complex computations using your data has tremendously changed. What it means is the agentic use case in the Gen AI world or the traditional ML modeling use cases, the offline data or the training data or the online use cases for inferencing or embeddings, the turnaround time has drastically changed. That's the speed play. Second, on the cost play is it's kind of interrelated, where all these LLMs and all these tools are competing with prices, because the companies who are leveraging these different open source or like closed source technologies, they are building a lot of wrappers on top of each other. And what it's happening is this ecosystem is becoming mature and mature, and people are kind of trying to penetrate in the market by like lowering down the costs, starting off from the mm, big companies like on the LLM side who are offering LLMs like Meta, OpenAI, and others, Google, but also on these middle companies on bottom of the stack who are building wrappers on top of it. So, for example, there are a bunch of speech to text, text to speech, like 11 Labs and DeepGram. So now there are like so many companies who are doing this. They are trying to reduce prices, and as prices would reduce or become open source, the cost play will be a big factor where it will almost be like no cost at all to use and leverage these technologies in the stack, as compared to the expensive SaaS vendors in the previous world. And the third part is the quality. So the whole quality layer, starting off with the ML training data quality on like the foundational level, but also on the quality for the features which are being shipped, right? The whole stack is being disrupted by multiple vendors, and these observability tools and quality tools are leveraging Gen AI at a level where they're using a lot of kind of external and internal data to improve the quality. So think of it as a business. You are going very fast, you're going at a very cost efficient way, but you're also doing it right with the right quality. So it's the internal use cases are being leveraged across the industry at a very, very fast pace.
You do mention they're being done at a really fast pace, but what are some of the challenges that come in during this time?
The biggest challenge I say is the mindset change. So a lot of us as humans, it takes us time to change, manage ourselves and how we operate. So the main challenge, like for PMs, is like how do they pivot from their plans so quickly, because the macro environment is changing at a pace which is hard to catch up with. But as soon as you hear a signal in happening at micro and macro environment, you need to change your strategy and pivot to something new. And for that, you need to have that mindset. So that's coming from leadership and PM mindset. Now, on software engineering side, where like you're actually building stuff, same problem, people mindset. How do you change yourself where you are comfortable with a previous tech stack to this modern stack? Some people are like much more adaptable and flexible. I think those guys would be the ones who'll kind of benefit the most from this evolution, both on like PM and management side, but also on the IC side who are actually building stuff. So the faster you make yourself much more adaptable and try to be on top of things and have that mentality to kind of pivot quickly based on what you're learning in the market, that's where it'll take you places. So that's also a challenge, but that's where people are also benefiting out of it. Some of the big companies you see, like they are constantly evolving themselves as new things are coming into place with this whole AI revolution.
That's super helpful. So tell me more. Engineers aspire to transition into product management. What are the skill sets that they should develop to make that jump successfully?
Great question, Shobit. And I talk to a lot of aspiring PMs and PMs who are trying to grow their careers in different work streams within product management. And the first thing which I would start them to kind of identify is what kind of product management they want to do, what kind of product management they want to pursue in their careers, because the paths they decide and identify that is quite different, and the skills also required is quite different. And I'll give you some examples. So I've seen some software engineers who want to be on the technical product side or the platform product side, who like to be closer to the technology and at the bottom of the stack, like where I came from. So there's one set of people there. There's another set of people who want to kind of move slightly away towards the business side of things, where growth, notification, those kind of products come in, web side or interfaces side. that PM responsibility and roles is slightly different. So once you have that understanding and you've identified where you want to go, then I start telling them different skills. So I'll start with the platform PM side, which is my expertise on how software and engineers can make a switch um, to that field, and I would talk less about the growth side because I'm not an expert there, but I do have some idea. So let me start on what are the top skills which platform PM leaders look for these roles. Um, the first kind of bias which platform PMs have or technical product managers have of people coming in from software engineering background is they are unable to zoom out and connect to the bigger picture. So they are great at solving technical problems where they can go into the depth of the problem and kind of work very closely with engineering on what that solution would look like, how it would shape up. But they struggle to zoom out and connect it to the top line business metrics or how they can expand that product to more and more problems and kind of evolve and mature that. So unless you build a skill where you know where to pause and being software engineers, most folks like to solve problems and they just want to go till like the bottom of the problem and get their hands dirty and start solving that. It's very critical for them to change that habit and kind of stop and leave it to the engineering leadership after that or engineers. So once they identify the problem and know, okay, the engineers understand the problem, what they're trying to solve, leave the how part to them. And that's where software engineers who are moving into product management struggle with mostly. They are not able to pause and zoom out and leave it to the engineering to take it from there, the how part. So that's something which a person moving from software engineering to platform PM should be very careful about on when to zoom out and leave it to engineering. So the why and what is what PMs should do, and the how they should leave it to architecture and engineering teams. The second thing which I would recommend to people moving from software engineering to PM is storytelling. And it's kind of connected to my previous point where they get lost in their individual kind of projects or things which they've done in the past, and they are not able to kind of connect on a zoomed out level, on a higher altitude, on how it ties to their overall story of them being pitching themselves as a potential platform PM for that company during the interviews, right? So they will start going into details of their individual products and just lose the picture of what their bigger story was. So how to connect that story of what they built in their previous roles? It can be in as software engineers. You just need to tell the story that how that product helped the business. How did you manage the abstraction layer of that product with the multiple stakeholders? And what is your story on how you kind of delivered impact and unlocked value for the company? That's where the challenge is with the storytelling with the people coming in from software engineering background. So these are the two things which I would say are the most critical skill set which software engineers should focus on.
So, Endra, you mentioned like all these challenges that engineers have in transitioning to product management. How did you overcome that in your own journey in the transition to product management?
Great question, Shobit. I would say it's a journey, and I learned over the years as I transitioned into the role on how to build my muscle around these three skill sets. Initially, I was in the same boat as most of the other software engineers, where I was like wanted to be brainstorming with software engineers all day long on what the problem was, doing sessions with them and deep dive things like that. And what I realized very quickly is when my leadership or my stakeholders, when they were asking questions about what my product roadmap is, what my strategy is, what are the other use cases where this solution could help, I was blank, and I did not have an answer to those questions. And that's when I started realizing that I'm not a software engineer anymore, so I need to have these answers, otherwise I'll fail in this role. So I adopted to it, started doing kind of more deliberate pauses in these deeper discussions, and I would just exit out of it. And kept an eye and pulse on what the engineering team was doing. I used to attend their stand-ups on and off, and try to get a sense on how the solution is being built, but not also get too much deeply involved. So it was a deliberate move when I started realizing my mistakes, because I saw myself not performing well on the other critical aspects of the product management job. Uh, the second thing, Shobit, I'll also mention is the storytelling aspect of it. Um, when I started presenting some of these platform and technical products to non-technical stakeholders on how it will bring value to them, I could see a struggle to my audience to understand what I'm trying to say. And the reason which I saw and noticed was because there were a lot of jargons which I kind of thought that people would know about it, because I was too much deep into it. And I kind of thought that, okay, everybody knows about these, but those came out as jargons to them. They didn't know what that meant. They were zoning out as I was talking, because I was using these words which they didn't understand what it meant, right? So I started realizing that, okay, people are zoning out, and I got some feedback, and I had an opportunity to work with great product leaders who were also technical, but who were great at storytelling. And when I started getting these feedback that avoid using any technical terms in these, when you are telling these stories, so unpack them as much as you can, so that they people are able to connect with it. So to give you an example, it's a very small example. In traditional machine learning or data world, features is something which is used for data points which are valuable as information. And this features word is very broad, right? It can be a feature which is delivered by a software company for its customers. It can be multiple things. But in data and ML world, this features is used for data points which are informational for that use case. And I thought it's pretty basic, maybe they'll know. So when I was talking to these stakeholders and trying to tell them value about these data points or information, valuable source of assets or data assets, they were blanking out because I was using features. And that's when I started realizing that I have to unpack as much as I can.
Even the language matters there. They have different phrasing, and you were the one who had to seemingly transition over to use their language.
Exactly. You need to meet your audience where they are, also in their user journey and the pain points, but also where they come from, the background they have. When I talk to ad and marketing folks, I use different words, I use different storytelling. But when I'm talking to feature teams who are building engineering products, who are like more on the above the stack, I might go slightly technical with them because they are engineers or they are building technical products. So you need to know what's your audience and build your story around it.
Last but not least, how can our listeners follow your work and connect with you?
I'm active on LinkedIn. They can follow me, look me up. It's my first name and last name. I also tweet once in a while on my X. I follow a lot of PM material or both on technical and platform side. So I retweet their content, which I find useful. Your listeners can benefit, find these thought leaders in this space who are sharing good content both on this Gen AI space, but also on the platform product management space.
Andrew, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on platform product management, on AI, on career transitions. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Shobit, for having me. I love talking about this. Your questions were very insightful. Yeah, thank you for having me.
And then to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit a like and subscribe. And if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or one of the many other podcasts, just make sure to subscribe, rate, leave a review if you can. It really means a lot. And stay tuned for more deep dives into product management careers. See you next time.
Hey, be sure to check out our website at intentionalproductmanager.com to see how you can level up in your career.